Julia-Simone, come in. So great to see you.
Oh, hey, Niigaan, what's up? You sounded really urgent on the phone.
I'm so happy you could come. Hey, okay, listen. I got an opportunity for you.
What's that?
Okay, so you know you've been doing great work here at the Free Press. You've covered climate change, northern Manitoba communities, housing, poverty in Winnipeg. I really like the job you did when the paper needed a voice on Black Lives Matter. You've written features for the Narwhal, the Walrus, and of course, all the nationally known pieces in the Globe and Mail and the Discourse. You make music, you're a poet, you do visual art. And now, like after all of that, I think you're ready for the next step in your career.
This sounds very exciting. Ready for what?
You're ready to become the Lone Ranger.
What?
Yeah. Hey, Dan's off this week, and I was looking around the newsroom and I was wondering who could ride a horse, wear a mask, carry a six-shooter, and would be interested in joining me on the podcast trail fighting evildoers in the Old West.
Okay, what are you talking about? What makes you think I resemble a Lone Ranger? Frankly, I'm insulted.
Insulted? I think you'd make a great one because you're...
First of all, I'm black. I'm not like...
From Calgary?
Oh.
What else did you think I was thinking?
Oh, nothing. You know what, actually? Not only will I co-host this podcast with you this week, I also think I make a better Lone Ranger. I mean, has Dan ever been to the Stampede? Has he ever ridden a horse? I am a way cooler Lone Ranger now that I think about it.
Okay, sweet. Okay, now say into the mic, "Hi ho, Silver, away."
I won't be saying that. But I will teach you what we say in Calgary. So it's not appropriate to say a yee-haw. You got to dig really deep, and you hit him with a yahoo.
The Winnipeg Free Press proudly presents, in partnership with CJNU 93.7 FM, Niigaan and the Lone Ranger. Here are your hosts, Niigaan Sinclair and special guest host, Julia-Simone Rutgers.
Welcome to a special episode of Niigaan and the Lone Ranger with not the Lone Ranger, but my very good friend from the Winnipeg Free Press, fellow writer, Julia-Simone Rutgers. Welcome, Julia-Simone.
Hello, Niigaan. Thank you so much for having me.
We are so happy that you could be here with us. Not just because I didn't want to do the podcast alone this week, but because I've admired you for a long time. I've actually had you come and speak to my students at the University of Manitoba on your great work on poverty and housing in Winnipeg. And it's just a real honor to share this space with you. Maybe we'll take over and just kick Dan out for good.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I think, some people of color power on the podcast, not a bad thing. But, the feeling's mutual. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I feel like I learn a lot when we chat and hang out. So I'm glad to be here.
Well, it's like I said, great to have you on, and I'm sure our producer Adam will be very impressed with our great opening bit there. So let's get to the news. What we've, we're in election season really here in Manitoba. And what we're seeing, this has been a frequent topic in the podcast for the past few weeks, seeing the way that the Conservative government in Manitoba is rolling out, preparing for their big budget, which is on March 7th, I believe, but has been rolling out announcements. And we saw another one this week where announced, ironically, at the Thunderbird House in downtown. We'll talk maybe about that in just a minute. But a huge housing announcement where 300 new social housing units have been announced, promising to fund another 400. The Conservative government in Manitoba, Family Ministers Rochelle Squires, is promising $58 million in new funding for 2023-24. And on top of the already 68 million that it already had pledged. Now, you've worked a lot with housing. What's your thought on this announcement?
You know what? I think it's well summed up. Carol Sanders at the Free Press, quick shout out to our colleagues in the legislature there, wrote a great story, and then she quotes, some folks who work in housing and homelessness, some of the nonprofits in the city. And, something I've heard from them over and over again, and it's quoted again in this story, is just the Manitoba government loves to put out a plan, a funding announcement, a big idea, and then there are very rarely any specifics to back it up. And I think that that's what we see again here. 300 new social housing units. That's a good thing. There's no denying that it's good to have more social housing units, but 300 units is the bare minimum needed to keep up with demand that rises every year for social housing. And so agencies have been asking for a permanent 300 new units a year commitment, and then some more to make up for the backlog for years and years on end. And this, it kind of feels like a bare minimum. Not to mention, 58 million in new funding. That's very exciting. It's very vague what that money is going to be used for, where that money is going to go. The province, it isn't even sure who's going to be building these new social housing units yet. They're going to be issuing requests for proposals in the fall. We'll see what comes of that. It will likely be a partnership, Squires said. She said it might even be provincial-led housing. I never like to hear politicians say it might even be anything, because, we don't know what that means. But the government's...
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that, I think the first thing that I thought when I heard this announcement was, well, first of all, I'm very happy. And I'm also very aware of the kind of irony as the Conservatives are announcing social housing, like right outside the Thunderbird House there is 20 or so units, single bachelor units.
Hasta Niigaan, yes.
And, for people who are in very dire situations and having patrolled that area now for 5 years, it is a very interesting project. I think it's a complicated project because, Salvation Army's right there. There's a number of challenges, very many challenges, having picked up a lot of needles in that area, having seen the ways in which a lot of instances happen both on the street and across the street. And then, of course, the fact that there's it's almost like putting social housing in a very tough situation in which you're going to face a lot of challenges. But at the same time, it's also that was something that was a real uphill battle for those in the North End.
Yeah.
And then I'm also fully aware that the provincial Conservatives have sold off about 400 social housing since coming into office for the past 5 years or so. You keep hearing these stories of Manitoba Housing being turned into for-profit businesses, and then they announced another 300 units, 400 in the queue or 400 promised to be later. I mean, didn't they just have that?
Yeah. And I mean, that is such a great point. I mean, we talk a little bit about this, this offloading of public housing to the private sector, some of it to the nonprofit sector. But yeah, the government has seemed to be, the trend has been washing their hands sort of public housing, of social housing. When social housing run by the government is supposed to be, the reliable gold standard. There's been a trend of passing social housing to the private sector and then subsidizing, private sector rents, which doesn't work for most people. I love that you bring up the Niigaan project. It's very close to my heart. I wrote a lot about it when I was reporting that Walrus housing piece. And in those times, they were really still working to get things off the ground.
And so many obstacles were in their way along the journey.
So many construction materials, supply chains, funding, all of these things. It's very exciting to see that it has worked out. But yeah, as you said, like that neighborhood, I mean, you've got the Bell Hotel across the street. You've got, the MMF planning to open their new 20 units of social housing with wraparound supports. It's in the building directly next to the Bell Hotel, which is, again, right across the street from the Niigaan project, from Thunderbird House. There is this sort of new social housing popping up, but the government's track record is not a clear commitment to expanding and providing more social housing supports. Like even passing those units off to the nonprofit sector, that very rarely comes with additional funding for the nonprofit sector.
And also the idea that housing is this kind of island, and that's what I meant when I'm talking about that project around the Thunderbird House, because if you don't deal with poverty, right, and if you don't deal with the issue of addiction, housing really doesn't matter. And my experience has been really profound in that we have many units, but people don't want, shelters in particular is what I'm talking about. But people don't want shelters; they want tents because they feel safer there, they feel more comfortable, and they're even willing to face minus 40-degree temperature because that's the situation of shelters. And similarly for housing, in that if people don't feel that a house is a home, and they don't feel comfortable and safe in that home, then it's almost like the home is created almost needlessly. And so there needs to be a poverty strategy alongside the housing strategy. But, the number that really blew me away, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, there's an 8,000 person waiting list for Manitoba housing.
Yeah. You make an excellent point. Housing is, you talk about the housing first approach, right? Where so many of these, concurrent, I guess, struggles that the city faces, whether it's addictions, mental health, poverty as a whole, a lot of it starts with that, that sense of home, that sense of place, and what creates a safe sense of home for people. But yeah, that 8,000 person waitlist, I mean, it fluctuates all the time. It is, I think, a really big indictment of the network of care that we have in the province. A lot of those are families, small families, large families. That number, it's not 8,000 individuals, it's 8,000 families that are still waiting for a place to live and a place to call home. You do see so many people choose not to take up shelter beds because they lack support. They're restrictive. They are, often spaces where people feel really watched and sort of controlled in what they're able to do. And autonomy for people is so important. And that's why social housing is so important, because it should just be an easily subsidized place to live in a neighborhood you feel comfortable in, where you can, send your kids to school, go to the grocery store. And yet there's just so little of that available. I mean, we have tons of empty units that are in need of repairs. The government has been slashing and slashing and slashing the care and maintenance budget for these homes. You're adding new units. You haven't finished fixing the ones that are out of commission. A lot of these social housing units aren't in the neighborhoods people feel comfortable. That was one thing that really struck me about Niigaan as a project was, while it is a tough area to have a social housing project, it is an area that was chosen because residents who had been evicted from the campground outside of the MMF building in that same neighborhood, they wanted to stay in that area. There were a lot of supports there, a lot of community developed there, right? And so also putting it there.
Main Street project's right there.
Yep.
And then on top of that, the fact that, you had it was kind of in this real sweet spot, a terrible term to use, but a real sweet spot in terms of the frontline organizations that were able to address and support those people. We were there regularly, but when those communities scattered, they mostly scattered along the Red River, and they came out of the catchment of where we could patrol and then be a regular presence as the Mulla Bear Clan. Also, the Bear Clan didn't go there anymore because it's way out of their catchment, which is on the other side of Maine. I don't want to, pile on the darker stories, but there's also something that came out recently last week. Campaign 2000 has released yet another report on child poverty, child welfare in the country. Campaign 2000, for those who don't know, is something that started in the late 80s. It's basically a nonpartisan coalition, about over 100 or so organizations. A lot of my colleagues are a part of Campaign 2000. And what they do is they offer a report card on where provinces are at in terms of child poverty. And Manitoba, perhaps not surprising for a number of reasons, doesn't come out very well alongside many of the other prairie provinces. Manitoba has 7 times the national average of children that are in poverty. 1 in 5 children in Manitoba are in poverty. But in situations like Churchill, we're talking about 3 out of 10 children that are living in poverty. And so it's really true, this kind of theory that I have in Manitoba, in that Winnipeg has this this situation of deep poverty that's affecting children. But as you go more north, and Phoenix Sinclair being perhaps the worst example, children get more and more impacted as poverty is not addressed. And we see, Tina Fontaine, of course, who had, was in the child welfare system and then ends up in Winnipeg, but that all began in the north. And so the situation in the north is very dire and is impacting children the most. We hear often about murder missing Indigenous women and girls. We particularly hear about the over-incarceration of Indigenous men. But we're really seeing a dire situation coming out of the pandemic, where children are faced with not being able to be fed, not access to appropriate health. And because of the pandemic, things are worse and worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is, it's such a heartbreaking, set of facts. And I've done a lot of work in sort of recent months talking to communities in the north, and particularly communities who are working to sort of support Indigenous youth in the north through land-based education, through sort of reconnection with culture, with traditional values. But that poverty situation, it just underscores so many of the issues that we see in Winnipeg, in all of Manitoba. It lends itself to the housing crisis. It lends itself to, the child welfare crisis in Manitoba. Clayton Thomas Mueller told me the other day, there are more children in care now than there ever were during the residential schools. That is linked to child poverty. It's the further from these urban centers where these resources are concentrated, not only in the city, but in particular neighborhoods in the city, the further away you get from that, the more dire these situations become. And I think it's easy for Winnipeggers to not see the problem and therefore turn a blind eye, right?
And particularly think of it as a them problem, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is that when we have children in poverty, let's just focus on children, but we could talk about, of course, parents of those children, grandparents of those children. I mean, you just have to go to the Health Science Center today to see who is it that's using the emergency room at Health Science Center. It's by the vast majority is Indigenous peoples from the north, which is that's where they're funneled to, is where the Health Science Center is. But, when children are in poverty, they don't just use the healthcare system, but they also enter the justice system. Never mind the fact that 90% of the child welfare system is Indigenous children. And then on top of that, we're then faced as a community is, what do we do when they are chronically undereducated? How do we devise programs to address that? How do we devise what is the real solution, the most important solution, which is how do we get children to feel good about themselves? That's language and culture. And I don't know if you've noticed, but what I've just told you is the TRC calls to action in the first 40.
Absolutely.
Calls. And so all of those things address the issue of children, and particularly Indigenous children, because it's not just Indigenous children, but for the most part, it is the majority Indigenous children who are impacted by this. And so we need governments to step up, but we also need agencies to take attention, and everyday Winnipeggers to realize this is an issue that's going to impact all of us.
Yeah, and as hopeless, I think, as it may sometimes seem, as you mentioned, there is a full report with a clear set of recommendations to start addressing these problems. And I don't think people realize that the plans are there. We just have to start following them.
Well, for both topics, but particularly the second one, I think we have a perfect guest this week. Our guest is Grand Chief from Manitoba, Keewatinowi, Okimakanak, Garrison Settee, who is a good friend of mine, and I know you've been wanting to interview Garrison for quite a long time, Grand Chief Settee, and he's going to be our special guest. He's worked for decades as a former teacher, and he also knows the issues of children and education in the North. He's going to talk a little bit about what are the interests of the North economically, but then also educationally, and what is some of the biggest challenges that are coming out of the pandemic. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that with Garrison. And we have a very special storyteller who you worked very hard to get us this week.
I did, yes. So switching things up maybe a little bit for Niigaan and the Lone Ranger podcast, we have a story today from Nestor Wynrush. He is a storyteller, a poet, a musician. He's influenced by poets like Linton Kwesi Johnson, Rakim. He is an echo and a future footprint of his ancestors. And he'll be telling a little bit of a story for us today.
Hi, this is Elliot Walsh, a.k.a. Nestor Wynrush, recording artist, poet, arts facilitator, artistic director for Trinipeg Live Mixtape and Jerryfest. This is Storytellers. This came off of working with Peter Lopez as a great manager, wonderful older Jamaican dude that loved music, and working one summer with him in Malton with a number of youth, part of a mentorship program, driving around playing hip-hop beats and dancehall and some good old rock steady, driving around Malton and Rexdale. That left an impression, and going to Ackham Hall in Winnipeg, which I did with the money that I worked to get, ended up going to Winnipeg, where my extended family lived and now I live, and just going to their Black History program that was run by Adoma Patterson at the time. And so those lessons always stayed with me. And Ackham Hall is on Watt and was established in 1968, and that's the African Caribbean Association of Manitoba. You might have seen some of the dancers and such do the ballet, I believe, at Folklorama for years. We're 2 minutes into the story, and I haven't even got into the first job, but I think it's really important that you know the where this all comes from. So during that time of working for Mr. Lopez and the Malton Neighborhood Services, we talk about music, and the one thing that the Toronto area had was lots of music. You got music from Buffalo, WBLK, Depew, Buffalo, coming in over the water. You had CKLN and CIUT, the community stations, and the York station also playing hip-hop music. And just knowing that I had cousins and family outside of the city and just wanting to provide some information to them, I just ended up writing. Down the street from us in our block, in Saga, was a bunch of barbershops and a vinyl record shop, something that was modeled by the record shops that these two Jamaican cats, they loved growing up. And so in this area that we lived in Cooksville, Mississauga, the core area, what it became, it's just like it was a lot of us and our culture. So I just wanted to spread that and give that more to my family, and also to the high school that I was in, and because I was always listening to the radio and stuff, and I got obsessed in breaking it down. So I'd write these articles, these pieces, and reviewing the music that was out and telling what the top 10 is and who was doing what. And so family would read that and they'd love it. And then the people in my high school, they liked it as well. Shout outs to TLK. And so I ended up, just out of confidence, I wanted to work in a record store. So the biggest mall in Ontario, might be even the second biggest, Square One, is just around the corner from our block. And I just went and saw asked for the manager, and just handed them one of the magazines. Actually, she saw me handing out some of the magazines, these zines, I'd say, to some of the homies, to some of the brethren. And she's like, "What are you doing there?" I'm like, "I just handed this to a friend." And I already handed out a resume. Yes, I already handed out a resume there. And she's like, "Can I see that?" And so I was like, "Yeah, sure, just keep it." And I was walking by again to check what was going on, if the resume was there, but she ended up hiring me, like, on the spot. She's like, "I like this. You could do this." Like, give recommendations of what was out there. And I don't even think there was a black employee inside of there, or someone that knew the music. And remember, at this point, this is like mid-90s, early 90s, and rap was just picking up. And especially in Canada, it was an unknown and very, very, very white space. Being a youngin', going into there and getting a job, just working a block away from home, I was pretty proud of myself.
Here we are with a very special guest on the Niigaan and Lone Ranger podcast, Grand Chief of Manitoba, Keewatinowi, Okimakanak, Garrison, Settee. Welcome to the Niigaan and Lone Ranger podcast.
Well, I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
And of course, my co-host, Julia-Simone Rutgers, who's on the trail with us and has actually probably a bit more experience than I do recently in terms of writing about the North, and is also working on lots of stories involving mining and housing and poverty. We're in the middle of winter here in treaty, the various treaty territories, and in Manitoba. And you're now in year 2 of your second mandate as Grand Chief of MKO. How has it been being Grand Chief? And also, you were a former teacher and former chief of Okimakanak community. You're in your community. How was being a teacher still something that you're doing today as the Grand Chief?
Being a teacher was one of the most privileged opportunities I had to impact our people, especially in the classrooms in high school. And I felt I had the responsibility to inspire, to motivate our students to try to find a way to create a better existence for themselves. It was a passion of mine to motivate our students to graduate and to finish their academic life. And because I realized growing up in a First Nation that the opportunities are very limited. And then when you realize that there's usually a 95% unemployment rate in First Nations, you need to find a way to navigate through that. And I felt that education was the way out of poverty, and also bringing into ideas of eliminating the codependency that exists because it's deliberately designed and orchestrated by colonialist regimes. So I found it very important. I found it my mission to inspire the youth to think outside of the box, to think beyond what they see. And that was a passion of mine, and it still is, to motivate students in our communities to rise above their circumstances and embrace education, to emancipate themselves from poverty and also the things that happen in First Nations. And then because I was teaching along these lines for a long time, the students started talking to their parents, and I'm talking about Aboriginal and treaty rights all the time, and also residential schools, the impacts of that, and also the assimilation has impacted our lives. And I taught a course, Indigenous law was a course that we introduced into the high school, and I taught this for many years. And the students started talking to their parents and saying, well, this teacher is talking about this teacher is teaching us this, and this teacher is motivating us to do this and that. And then they started talking to the parents for me to run as chief. And that was the furthest thing from my mind at the time, because I know what happens in those town hall meetings or band meetings. That I've seen how how tense can become. And I said, that's not for me. But as leaders, as elders started approaching me, then I gave myself the opportunity to think about it, and also to see what I can do. And so that's how I became a chief, by the encouragement of elders. I threw my name in the hat, and I became elected as a chief, and I was there for 5 years. But knowing the circumstances and situations prepared me for my role, because each circumstance in First Nations is pretty much the same everywhere else. So you're aware of the issues and you're aware of the situation. So it prepared me to be in my role, become more empathetic and understanding the chiefs that I represent.
I'm a little biased, of course. I'm a former teacher as well, but I think teachers bring things to the political circles that aren't seen, and are innovative and creative, because we're often changing gears a lot and trying to change the classroom and so on. I mean, MKO is arguably one of the most interesting political organizations in the country, because you don't just represent 26 First Nations, but you also you don't follow like colonial boundaries. Like one of your members is from Saskatchewan, Whitewater First Nation, I think. And is that right? Whitewater, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you don't just have chiefs voting for the MKO Grand Chief, but you also have head members of the community. And so that's really interesting, because what you've done is you've innovated governance. You're not following colonial boundaries. And you also cover multiple treaty areas, treaties 4, 5, 6, and I think it's 10 as well, too. 10,
10, yeah.
And so, yeah, like it's just very interesting, the work that MKO's doing. And of course, we talked a little bit before we were on air, but you're also a singer. You play in a band. How many Grand Chiefs are singers in a band playing Johnny Cash songs?
Not too many, yeah. But yes, our organization is unique, and in many ways, because we represent so many remote First Nations. And I've always argued that our organization has to be more vocal, because of the needs that are the needs that exist in the North are far more critical than some of the First Nations in the South, because of the remoteness. And I thought that we would have to be very strategic on how we communicate our messages to governments, because our people need the support, and our people need help more than any other demographic. So that's why I felt it was important that we build the credibility of the organization, and also have stability in how we move as an organization, so that we can be able to be the organization that is most effective in lobbying for our people. So that's something that's very important.
Yeah, I think that structure, it is incredibly unique, and it gives a lot of voice and kind of collective power to a lot of these remote First Nations. I want to shift a little bit, and it's not a huge shift. You were talking a little bit about employment opportunities in the North, and high unemployment rates, and sort of providing those windows, particularly for youth. I've been thinking a lot about the North and its economic development in my role doing climate reporting, and specifically thinking about the mining industry in recent months. And I think that there's this really delicate balance that starts to come up between economic development in the North and the relationship between economic development and mining, and the ethics, duty to consult under Section 35, impacts on the land, on hunting rights, fishing rights, trapping. What does a healthy balance between these factors, economic development and those ethics elements, look like for Northern First Nations?
It has always been clear that our First Nation people need to be consulted whenever there's any kind of activity in our First Nations. And because previously, in days gone by, that there was always that the lack of consultation and consulting, and also to accommodate. That's also a part of it, because what has happened in the past is that resources have been extracted from our territories for a long time without having First Nations having the benefit from those resources or the extraction. And now we're talking about it's a new era. There's a paradigm shift that's happening where First Nations are coming into a position where they can be partners in anything that happens when it comes to any kinds of resource extraction, but also at the same time, protecting the environment has always been crucial to all of our people. And without having that kind of engagement or discussion or those conversations, nothing will move forward. And there's a paradigm shift where First Nation people and leaders are very strong in what happens in our North, because nothing will happen without our free, prior, informed consent. Those days are over when people or corporations and mining companies come into our territory to start extracting resources without our involvement, or even having a revenue sharing process, because those things are changing, because we have to address all the issues that we have, like the unemployment and also the poverty that exists. It's because we have been marginalized from the economy in the North. We've been marginalized from being involved in the economy for the longest time, but those days are changing. And I think that we have young leaders that are educated, that we have young leaders that have backgrounds in law, we have educators, and also people that are very in tune with how the businesses works and corporations work. So it's a new day and a new era. So those things are changing. So, but it still involves consultation. And then if there's going to be a healthy balance, you're going to have to talk about consultation and accommodation, not just consulting and then leaving us alone. We want to be part of the process. And that's been missing for a long time. And I think that economic reconciliation is the operative word here. And if there's going to be any economic reconciliation here, they're going to have to start putting in some effort and also some work in accommodating our people to make sure that we are part of the prosperity, the wealth and prosperity of any corporation.
You know, it's funny you use consultation. You were out on a press conference recently with Grand Chief Daniels, Grand Chief Merrick, and you know, like consultation is most oftentimes we're going to call you somewhere along the process. That's not at the start of the table. I mean, and I think the press conference that I'm referring to, you guys were talking about why is it that leaders and governments are kept out of health conversations. I mean, there's perhaps nobody who knows more about health than First Nations, particularly the fact that our communities and northern communities particularly handled the pandemic better than almost anyone else by choosing to make some really drastic decisions. You know, I think that's really important, and I think it's important to recognize that you know, First Nations need to be at the table at the very beginning, not at the somewhere along the way.
That's a message that I've been telling the governments ever since I've been in my role, is that there's been many decisions made about our Northern First Nation people, and those decisions have caused irreparable harm to our people and have done more damage than good. And that happens, I said, when you do not involve us in your decision making, when you do not involve us in making policies. And I said, we have lived for 150 years by a lot of decisions that have been made on our behalf without our inclusion. I said, those days are over. I said, we are a people that are confident in our ability and our capacity to look after ourselves if we have the resources. I said, but nothing can happen in this day and age without our involvement, because that's why we were very strong when the pandemic came, because we knew that our people were most vulnerable, they were most at risk, and we had to really step out and actually engage and force change, initiate change when it comes to our people. And I still believe that it's very important that no decisions, provincial or federally, should take place without our involvement. And we're not just going to sit back and allow those things to happen anymore, because our people's lives and well-being are at stake, and we need to continue to be firm in ensuring that we are engaged thoroughly and being part of these discussions and being part of decision making, because we are at a position where we can no longer allow any other government to dictate what happens in our territories.
That's a really excellent point. And when we were talking earlier about, resource extraction, you were talking about this idea now of economic reconciliation, right? Being in these decision-making roles, but also benefiting, from the prosperity of these projects. When we're looking at resource extraction, I mean, the government has been talking up reconciliation as a focus for their mineral strategy. What does that economic reconciliation really look like in terms of this industry that has maybe caused more harm than good?
Yeah, I think that whatever we can do, we must figure out how we can protect our environment or harm it in the most minimal way, where our people are satisfied that whatever is happening is trying to ensure that we have the environment, the lakes and the waters and the forests for future generations. We always try to think 7 generations ahead. So that's just still part of those discussions. And we want to make sure there's minimal damage to the environment. And of course, there has to be resource extraction, but done in a way that is respectful and also not at the detriment of our environment and our lakes and our waters and our rivers and also our forests and the land. So those are things we're very careful of. Yes, we have to move forward. There has to be a progressive move forward in trying to establish an economy, but at the same time, you cannot jeopardize the future generations. So that's reconciliation and meeting us halfway and meeting us and allowing us to sit at the table to make these decisions along with the entities that come in our territories.
Manitoba, developed that framework. You're talking about this paradigm shift we're starting to see. It's developed this framework for mineral development in partnership with First Nations. That sort of started a few years back. The government's also highlighted Indigenous communities as eligible to receive money from the Manitoba Mineral Development Fund, which is, for those who don't know, a $20 million pot handed out by the Chamber of Commerce to support mining, exploration, mineral development. How have these kinds of steps been received by Northern First Nations?
We're treading very carefully, of course, and we're examining all the angles and also what are the potential options that we have. So we cannot really rush into a lot of these decisions because we're talking about at least 73,000 First Nation people that live in the North. We want to make sure that we act on the best interests of our people, so that we're very careful in how we navigate through this process, because I believe that every decision we make impacts our people, and we want to make sure we do what is right, we do what is environmentally safe, and also not just to jump at the opportunity when there's funding being offered to us, to make sure that we act with utmost circumspect so that we can do what is right, what is just for all of us. So it's a discussion that's still ongoing, and how we allocate those funding is another aspect of it. We want to make sure that what we do is fair for our people, and also making sure that we conduct our businesses in a way that will benefit us in the long run, perpetually and sustainably.
Would you say that in your time, I mean, because you have an extensive experience, not just, as we mentioned before, as a teacher, but then a chief of a local community, now Grand Chief, would you say that you've seen an improvement in life in the North over the 15 or so years you've been in significant leadership positions? Would you say that generally, when you go to First Nations, life is better, or is it the same, or is it in areas have gotten worse? Like, for instance, the recent death of Noreen Tate and the spate of violence on Opipa and Napiwin Cree Nation. I mean, really, it seems like at times the people from the South only hear these stories of dire difficulty, but would you say that things are better in the 15 years since you've been in leadership, not just because of you, but because of, like, in your experience, work with the province and so on?
I think that there's been gradual change, but not sufficient change. And when it comes to, I can say 10 years ago, I went to the United Nations as the chief of my nations to advocate and lobby on behalf of our Northern First Nations when it comes to poverty, lack of housing and also deplorable housing conditions and the water conditions, and also the issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women. 10 years ago, we went there to advocate because Canada was about to present their report on their human rights issues, actually trying to go there ahead of time to tell the truth. So there's been gradual change, but not sufficient change. As you see, the rates of suicide are still high in First Nations, and I'm dealing with chiefs every day about attempted suicides, and there's still a lot of poverty in our First Nations. So there's been gradual change, and even education, there's still not the quality education that our First Nations deserve because of the lack of funding, the disparity of funding when it comes to First Nation education. So I would like to say that there's been gradual change, but I think that we are nowhere we need to be as First Nations in the North. And we've been advocating, the chiefs have been advocating, we have been raising our voice. And it's sad to say, but the conditions have not really improved to a substantial degree that we can begin to celebrate. I don't think so.
Also, I mean, MKO, I think people might confuse this, but MKO is doesn't have a government per se, and it's a group that particularly works for advocacy of 26 First Nations. And so I think most Manitobans might not understand that the Southern Chiefs Organization, MKO, even the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, they do a lot of program delivery, some really important work, of course, all the advocacy, but isn't like a constituent government that can then go and make direct service delivery or policy changes or laws per se. I mean, you could pass, I suppose, or encourage communities to pass bylaws or so on, or chief and council resolutions, but it's not the kind of thing where we can just say, well, you go deal with this Grand Chief organization.
Yeah, well, by virtue that MKO as an organization cannot make decisions on the rights of individual First Nations when it comes to treaties or Aboriginal rights or anything to do with land. But by resolution in our assemblies, that's where I get my marching orders. If all the 26 chiefs direct me to do something specifically, I have that authority to act on their behalf. So it's at the direction of the resolutions and Chiefs Assembly and also our Executive Council. So that gives me that authority or the ability to be able to speak on behalf of the collective voice. But I never have the ability just to go on my own to make decisions on behalf of the 26 First Nations. So I feel comfortable in that role. And I'm I'm cognizant of the fact that I'm a representative of a collective voice, but also at the same time, I'm mindful of the limitations to my role. So I feel that as long as I'm getting the direction and the marching orders, I can continue to move to advocate and become that voice for our people.
Campaign 2000 just issued a report card on child poverty in Manitoba, and it showed, 1 in 5 children in Manitoba, and then as we get further north, a baffling 3 in 10 children in Churchill live in poverty conditions. We think the reasons for poverty are clear, but the solutions are complicated. Speaking, as that collective representative voice, what are some of the priority areas to address child poverty?
Well, child poverty is not something new. We can go back to 10 years of statistics being filed and compiled for people to look at, and very little has changed. And I was just perusing through the Manitoba poverty reduction strategy when the now Prime Minister was minister responsible for as a minister responsible for ending poverty, children's poverty, and then very little has happened. And so it's the lack of political will and also to implement these strategies. It's all nice to identify, yes, there's a problem, identifying the problems and the causes of these problems, but not having the initiative to reform or change status quo. It rests on governments, and that's where we as leaders will have to continue to pressure governments to ensure that they implement these strategies that will reduce poverty, but that nothing has happened that substantially, and also that 4 out of 10 First Nation children in the North still live in poverty, and that's because of the lack of resources, and also the inflation, and also the standards of living and basic needs are so high. Just getting like simple things like formula and diapers and foods that are conducive to a healthy lifestyle, and the unemployment rate being 85%, and even like single parents don't have daycare, so they can't go to work because nobody can look after their children. So there's resources that are not available, and it's a responsibility of the government to ensure that the resources are there, because our situation will be improved if from the federal level, if the treaties are being honored. We would never have to pound on the door for proper health systems or proper education systems and proper housing if those treaties were honored. But that's a federal responsibility. But at the same time, the province is responsible for allowing services to reach our communities, because First Nations are Manitobans as well. And they've always tried to sort of pass the buck when it comes to Manitobans living in First Nations, that they are federal responsibility. So there's a game there that's being played. So, but the bottom line is employment, education, and training will in no doubt change the status quo for a lot of the things that are happening when it comes to poverty. But being unable to access proper necessities, basic necessities, is a shame, and the governments are to blame for lack of providing these resources.
And like the one thing that I think is the chronic epidemic in our communities is mental health. Like, I think that trauma is not something that's in the past; it's something that's ongoing. And trauma is the cause of much of this situation. We might then therefore say addictions or poverty or even just if you think about the ways in which lateral violence happens within our community too. I mean, so much of it is tied to mental health. The federal government spent a lot of time talking about mental health coming out of the pandemic, has dedicated a number of funds to provinces to deal with the issue of mental health particularly, but there hasn't been any new dollars really. There was around mental health for First Nations. It seems to me that this is the most undiagnosed epidemic of our community. And if you think about, of course, intergenerational harm from residential schools, et cetera, I just list them all down. It just seems that mental health should be that one advocacy thing that I think of the Chiefs up north just did that. They all got together and wore pink shirts for bullying.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how important it is that, just bullying alone is something that saves people's lives.
Absolutely. So I've sat down with the minister responsible for mental health, and I presented a position that after the pandemic, and even during the pandemic, there was so much trauma and also systemic trauma that has really plagued our First Nations, and that it's really exacerbated by the pandemic. And I was surprised how little effort was given to mental wellness in our First Nations. As a former teacher, I remember teaching at a school. Actually, I was a vice principal at the time. 1,500 students in the school. Only 2 counselors were present, and they were overworked. There was just not even enough of the support that they could provide. So it is a crime. It is unethical that we deprive our First Nations of that kind of help that they need. And because we live through all kinds of trauma that other segments of society probably do not have to live through. And also that we need those resources. And also you start to have to train people to work in those capacities, because simply the depression and also the suicide attempts are non-ending. Even the chief will call me as late as 2 days ago that there's a school where a student had to cut down a fellow student that would attempted suicide. Like, these are the realities that we live in, and the governments are not waking up and trying to get some kind of funding to make sure that the mental health issues are addressed, because it's not happening. And our chiefs are suffering, our communities are suffering because what's happening because they live it from day to day. It's sad.
These are issues that, in my understanding, have been facing Northern First Nations in Manitoba and across the country for years and years. And you were mentioning earlier, there are plans drawn up and action task forces, pulled together. And yet the political will just still doesn't seem to be there. And this is something we were talking about a little bit earlier on the show with respect to housing, is this idea that the government puts out these plans, these ideas, and then along the road, the results don't seem to show up. Pulling together what we were talking about at the beginning about innovation with this governance structure and these paradigm shifts we're starting to see. Are there innovative new ways that you're thinking about discussing among First Nations to secure these services without waiting on government, or to be pushing the government to actually act and stop sort of talking in circles around these issues? Where do we go next?
I think MKO has been very assertive and actually expecting change, if not demanding change, because we've been at the table. We've been saying the same thing over and over again without any change. But at the same time, we are now in a position where we're expecting those changes to happen because the lives of our people depend on it. And one of my goals is to make sure that we have the credibility and also to prove ourselves that we have the capacity to take on to have the resources to be able to address our own issues. And we have the people, we have the expertise. It's just a matter of giving us the resources to be able to look after our crisis or look our situations, just like as we did in the pandemic. You just give us the resources, we'll do it, because we know what to do. And that's probably one of the things that the government has been very reluctant, is to hand over the resources so we can do what we want, because we know how to do things in our First Nations. It's a matter of giving us the resources, and that's where the problem is. And we are not in a position anymore to be used as political pawns. And just because there's an election coming up, and all of a sudden there's all kinds of promises, like, we don't play that game anymore. We're dealing with life and death here, and we don't have time for political games anymore. We want action, and we want change. We want reform, and we want things to happen on the ground. And we want to be part of that, and we're being part of that as an organization.
And I mean, isn't that the reason why, creativity, innovation, we can do it ourselves? Isn't that why it's so important to, if people looked at you and went, why is this political leader holding a concert at Stony Mountain Institution? Like you might look at that, or, performing for communities at the Red River X in your band, or there was an event, I think, at the Red River X I saw you at last time, and there was a fun run for Indigenous youth. I think that's what it was. These events are crucial because they are what our communities have always done, which is to incorporate laughter, kindness, food, and that these are the basic solutions that I think are often forgotten by governments. They think, oh, well, this problem's too immense. This issue is too, but a pancake breakfast bringing fathers and daughters and children together does as much work as any child welfare policy. In fact, probably more so.
Absolutely. So what we do, like for myself personally too, like I am aware of the people that I represent. I'm aware of where they live, and I'm even in that Stony Mountain. Those are citizens of MKO, and they do matter. And I wanted to show them that they're not forgotten about. And we do those things just to reach out and maybe offer some hope. Like when we go into penitentiaries, and I've been there 3 times, and it's just to reach out and just hear them out and listen to their stories, because there's hope for change for everybody. And that's why I do that, just because there's hope for change. And if there's any time I can draw attention to a cause, like we do this thing called the Santa Express, where we take Santa into our First Nations and we get all kinds of donations to make sure that the child receives a toy and some candy. If there's no other place where they can get it, we go in, and I've done that. And it's a very rewarding experience to see the children, and also to see the reaction of the children when Santa comes into their community. We've done it through. I've been on a chopper and landed in communities. I've been on a plane and landed at airports, and the children come. So these things we do to raise awareness of. And getting some support, and if I can use my talent to be able to do that, I will do it. And it's not a self-centered approach to things. Like I do it because if I can help, I'll do it. I'll make a fool out of myself if I have to.
Thank you so much, Grand Chief Settee, for coming in and for speaking with us. I mean, this was a fantastic conversation, and your insights and the ending on, I think, this little moment of joy is a really special thing. So thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you for having me. I do appreciate this conversation.
Miigwech, Grand Chief Settee, and I can promise you that I will definitely get breakfast next time we see each other, and as thanks for being on the Niigaan and Lone Ranger podcast. And I think it is so valuable to end on hope, because so much, the thing I'm blown away by is as every single leader of our First Nations, Métis, Inuit communities that I ever meet are always people that are embedded in hope. And I think you wouldn't get into public service otherwise. I could say the same thing about almost every politician. But despite the challenges and the obstacles, there's a million reasons to not be hopeful and to still talk about hope after, a decade and a half, 2 decades in leadership is inspiring. So much.
Chimigach.
Big thanks to everybody for joining us this week. We had a wonderful time, and I want to say a big miigwech to you, Julia-Simone, my co-host, for being my partner here on the trail in the Niigaan and Lone Ranger podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute treat. It's lovely to hear from so many different voices today, and to just chat with you about what's going on in the world.
We're very excited, and I hope that we have you back. However, I have to, they do that little segment on fact checking, and in some TV shows where they come in at the end and they say, well, let's do some fact checking. Well, we have just uncovered our crack research team here at the Niigaan and Lone Ranger podcast that Dan Lett actually worked for the Calgary Herald, and he has covered the Stampede. So what do you think about that?
Oh, no. Well, then I'm going to have to retract some of my earlier comments about being a better Lone Ranger than Dan. I still
think you're right up there. I think you maybe surpassed him in many ways.
I think I just have the sort of Lone Ranger cowboy spirit about me. It's hard you can't replicate that with working at the Calgary Herald, unfortunately. So
he loses all Calgary credibility because he cheers for the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's
goodness. Yeah, I think that really explains it all. There's no more comment necessary there.
With that, we want to say a big miigwech to our editor, Paul Simin, who makes this podcast possible, from the Winnipeg Free Press, and all the great people. Wendy Sawatsky, who uploads this and makes sure that we look shiny and new on all the platforms. We want to say a big miigwech and thanks to Adam our producer from CJNU, who does exceptional work and makes us sound really great. And a huge thanks to our guests this week, Grand Chief Settee and Ness, for joining us as storyteller. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and if you do, please share it with your friends, subscribe, and a big hope that you come back, Julia-Simone.
Yeah, thank you again for having me. Thank you to everybody who makes this possible. This is a wonderful project, and I hope to be back on the trail, as they say.
Should we get one more Calgary yeehaw, or what was it?
Oh no, it's no yeehaw. It's a yahoo.
Perfect. All right, see you next week.